An obstacle in learning to hypnotize oneself can arise if a student has an exaggerated idea of what he or she imagines he or she will experience during the trance state. Not many people have the expectation of entering some strange mystical mental state and being wafted off into some indefinable realms. But sometimes preconceived ideas of what a trance is can hinder rather than help progress. If a student is trying to attain something which has no existence except in his or her own imagination, this will obviously hinder his or her progress in the attainment of a real trance state. Another obstacle can arise because students of self-hypnosis very frequently underestimate the degree in which they have been affected in their practice sessions. It is an established fact that people tend to underestimate the depth of trance that they have attained. Students who are acquainted with textbooks on hypnosis will be well aware that frequently the subject's assessment of how far he had been hypnotized is quite incorrect. This is often due to an expectation of some strange experience, and even when therapeutic benefits or post-hypnotic suggestions are a demonstrable proof that hypnosis has been achieved, the subject will sometimes stubbornly maintain that he or she has not been hypnotized. These two obstacles of undervaluation of progress and expectation of some mysterious experience during the trance state can be avoided by keeping an open mind, assessing and evaluating progress made in any particular session. This is achieved by avoiding negative comments such as, "I'm not doing this well," or "I'm not making any progress." The fact is that the trance state can vary vastly according to the mental and emotional attitude of the individual at the time he or she is carrying out a trance induction session. During the session, the student may be discharging muscular or emotional tensions and so appear to be restless, and it may seem to him or her that he or she is not making progress, whereas in actual fact he or she is making real and positive steps towards achieving relaxation, emotional equilibrium, and the trance state. On the other hand, he or she may just relax and sink peacefully into a pleasant, lethargic state. To avoid being influenced by the ups and downs which may be encountered in suggestion sessions, it is wise to avoid any negative comments and concentrate on carrying out regular suggestion sessions. In all cases, the trance state is characterized by a sense of remoteness, but this does not mean losing consciousness. Volitional control is never lost in the self-hypnotic trance state. If self-control is lost, it is no longer self-hypnosis, for the individual drifts into a deep trance which immediately turns into ordinary sleep, from which he or she will awake in a normal manner. The length of time he or she sleeps will depend on how tired and comfortable he or she is, and what external distractions are going on, and what waking suggestions he or she has made to themselves before beginning the suggestion sessions. It is difficult to define mental and emotional states and conditions, but we can get some idea of what the trance state is if we examine a little more closely what happens when we go to sleep. Actually, it is not as though we were wide awake one moment and unconscious the next, though sometimes we appear to drop off to sleep suddenly. In reality, just before we lose consciousness, we pass rapidly through what in psychological language is called a hypnagogic condition. Also, in waking, we pass through a somewhat similar condition described as hypnopompic. Both these states are hypnoidal trance states, but they are both of such brief duration that normally during them or subsequently on waking, we have no memory of them. The self-hypnotic trance state is induced by letting yourself sink beneath the surface of the mind or to withdraw awareness from the outside world into oneself until the focal point of awareness approaches the boundary which divides the conscious from the unconscious mind, and to remain poised or suspended in this detached trance state. The whole art is to remain mentally poised, not rising to the surface, for if we do, we break the sense of detachment, nor sinking too deep, for then we drift into oblivion. In this state, with practice, we learn to retain sufficient awareness to remain linked with the outside world. In this state or condition, our intellect and our will lie ready at hand to be used if we wish to make the effort. If we remain quiescent in this suspended trance state, we have achieved what Krishnamurti has called choiceless awareness. And if we use self-hypnosis positively, we allow suggestions or possibly supplications to pass through our minds. I say allow, for our suggestions are the voicing of our needs or our hopes, our wishes and desires arising from the depths of our being. It sounds paradoxical to say that many people wishing to learn self-hypnosis have already been, to all intents and purposes, hypnotized without their knowing. That is not to say that their real objective in learning self-hypnosis is to dehypnotize themselves from some negative idea or emotions. Negative suggestions which have been put into a man's or woman's mind by someone else can ruin their lives, and frequently people are unaware that their shortcomings are due to the operation of damaging post-hypnotic suggestions acquired as a result of a shock or accident. It has to be kept in mind that negative ideas and suggestions can be registered in the unconscious mind without the induction of a trance, and also that the victim may or may not consciously remember them. A typical experience of this was related to me by a woman who, after her stepmother's death, had resigned herself to a lonely life in which work and worry were predominant. In her childhood, her stepmother had unnecessarily criticized her, unceasingly criticized her, telling her that she was stupid and ugly and that no man would ever look at her. When her stepmother died, she was left alone, fearful and filled with feelings of inferiority. She had, to all intents and purposes, she had been brainwashed. In her own quiet way, she tried to help herself, for she felt as though some invisible barrier was holding her back and preventing her from living an ordinary life. One night, she went to a lecture on psychology where the lecturer carried out some experiments in hypnosis. Being a suggestible subject, she responded well to his suggestions and was hypnotized. The hypnotist told her she would feel very confident, and for the first time in her life, the woman experienced what it was like to feel free from fear and feelings of inferiority. She went away from the lecture feeling that a new life was opening for her. Unfortunately, her newfound confidence lasted only a few days. But she knew from this experience that even if we're only for a short time, it was possible she shed her fears and she resolved to learn all she could under hypnosis. She attempted to get in touch with the lecturer, but her letters were unanswered, so she began to read all she could about the subject. She wrote to me, telling me what had occurred at the lecture and asking me if I would teach her to hypnotize herself. I taught her how to create the trance states in herself and instructed her how she could remove the effects of past negative conditioning and build herself a new life. This woman's experience was typical of the process of dehypnotization. In fact, it could be said she had experienced 4 different types of hypnotic conditioning. The first was the negative conditioning of her stepmother, constantly telling her that she was slow, stupid, and awkward. Despite the fact that no formal trance had been induced, the negative suggestions had been so effectively registered in the child's unconscious mind that, like a hypnotized subject, she had been acting out the stepmother's post-hypnotic suggestions all her life. She had felt, acted, and experienced exactly as her stepmother had said she would, and in fact had become the person her stepmother had said she would become. The second phase was when the lecturer's hypnotic suggestions of confidence had temporarily cancelled out the stepmother's negative influence. The third phase was when I hypnotized her in the course of teaching her how to hypnotize herself. The fourth phase was when she began to use self-hypnosis to remove all traces of the negative conditioning she had received in childhood, and for the first time to really express her own personality. The purpose of relating this case history is to draw attention to the fact that probably most hypnotic suggestions are concerned with removing damaging or negative ideas, emotions, attitudes, or habits, and dehypnotizing people from influences which prevent them from leading fuller lives. As many readers and students will already know, or will have gathered from my former comments about using recordings to learn self-hypnosis, if a subject is hypnotized by a hypnotist or a hypnotic recording, the hypnotic suggestions are made to him or her that later he or she, the subject, will be able to hypnotize him or herself. Then he or she will be able to do so. This sounds like a wonderful shortcut, but there is rather more in learning self-hypnosis than being hypnotized and having post-hypnotic suggestions made to one by a hypnotist. It is true that one can learn self-hypnosis in this way, but it is inadvisable to do so without first acquiring some knowledge of the subject. Self-hypnosis is a potent power which, like most powers, can be misused. In the hands of someone who has no self-knowledge, self-hypnosis is like a learner driver in charge of a powerful racing car. I saw an example of this misuse when a man who was an excellent hypnotic subject had a very badly poisoned foot. He was a mechanic who had spilt some melted solder on his foot and had given himself hypnotic suggestions that his foot would not pain him and that he would forget all about it. He successfully blocked out the pain and, by ignoring nature's warning, had a badly poisoned foot. I'm not suggesting that the average individual would be as imprudent as this, but those learning self-hypnosis should learn how they can use and direct the power they are acquiring. In learning self-hypnosis, there is a development of coordination between mental and emotional progress, which is akin to the development of the body through physical exercise, the acquisition of psychological instead of physical skills. The ability to withdraw into oneself, even a light trance, is not a kind of psychological trick, but a skill which, like any other skill, improves with practice. There is no reason why a hypnotist's aid should not be called upon to help in learning self-hypnosis, but it should be remembered that if the ability is acquired through the post-hypnotic suggestions of someone else, the initiation, if I can call it that, should be followed by regular daily sessions to bed down the habit and make it one's own before the post-hypnotic suggestions fade, which they will tend to do unless practice in trance induction is carried out for some weeks. The soundest course to follow would be to practice on the line set out in the foregoing sections, and if for some reason or other progress seems slow and the help of a hypnotist is available, there is no reason why his help should not be called upon. I have, as far as possible, avoided making personal references to myself, but I feel it would be helpful to mention that in acquiring my own knowledge of the subject, I spent some 9 years overseas in Africa and India, visiting many mystics, witch doctors, sadhus, and indigenous healers who were practicing what I am convinced were various forms of hypnosis. In India, the techniques are known as Morkana, Shastram, or Vashi, Karana, Vidya. In the Arab world, it is known as Tanweem, and in most places I visited, I found versions of hypnosis or self-hypnosis. This strange psychological phenomena is not explained by giving it a name, as did Dr. Braid when he christened the hypnosis, and in any more than electricity or atomic energy is explained by naming them. We can see their manifestations, but the hidden mystery eludes us. I found during my travels that most healing methods demanded on the part of those who sought help belief in a saint, a god, a holy relic, an image, or a shrine. And in many cases, a trance state was experienced by devotees. All faiths bring about improvements in some of their followers, but it does not appear that a man's critical faculty develops his ability to give himself up unreservedly in this simple act of faith diminishes. It seems that as man's reason develops, it weakens his faith and for a time puts nothing in its place. This, I believe, is an inevitable stage in development, and I also believe we are now living in an age which is seeing the dawn of new mental sciences. Foremost amongst these, and within the grasp of anyone who wishes to explore these new fields, is self-hypnosis. It is an uncommitted faith. It asks nothing except the courage to explore new methods and keep an open mind.